Today, let's discuss what everyone should know about the GMAT in 2025. It's almost 2025. It's been a big year for the GMAT and MBA programs in general. And we've been fielding a lot of questions about changing policies, changing score scales, and the basic elements of preparing for the exam. So here is the no frills, need to know information to make sure that you're set up for success during this particular moment in time when we're in the middle of quite a few changes in the industry and the way the test works. Diving right in. The most important thing to know about the GMAT right now is that it went through a major revision in 2024. This is going to be relevant to you whether you're just starting out right now or whether you've been studying for a little bit. The sections changed a little bit, the scoring changed a lot, and some of the policies around receiving and sending scores changed as well. This became a bit of a problem because the new exam was called the GMAT Focus Edition, which helped distinguish it from the old version of the exam. But about halfway through 2024, the exam name was changed back to just the GMAT, which started to create a lot of confusion around which materials were relevant to the new format of the exam and which materials are relevant only to the old format of the exam. So now, when you search for GMAT content and instructions, some of it says GMAT Focus Edition and some of it just says the GMAT. This is problematic because some old content is no longer relevant to the exam at all and actually could hurt your prep process. Again, whether you're just starting out or whether you're late in the game. Let's clarify this for you. Concept number one, all content before 2024 should be considered outdated and potentially irrelevant to the new test. Now, the content may not be totally irrelevant, and I'll talk you through the important exceptions to that in a moment, meaning the old stuff that is still potentially relevant for your studies. But as a safety measure, I would say any instructional content, meaning people telling you what and how to study, that's released before 2024, you should default to thinking this is probably not relevant. I should be skeptical of this, and I should try to validate this with an expert. So if you have access to an expert through a program you're engaging with or a one-on-one coach or other type of instructor, then I would recommend doing that. And if you're not sure whether it's still relevant to the current exam, then you might be able to post on some online forums and get some feedback from other people who are studying. That's a good idea. Or if you're really not sure, just don't engage with it and find a piece of content that is updated for the new exam. And the way you would know that is it's posted in 2024 or later. Okay, so that's my first piece of advice is just look out for potentially irrelevant content. This is something that's caused a lot of confusion for a lot of people who I've interacted with this year. And let's be honest, none of us want this to take longer than it has to take. It's just a means to an end for the vast majority of us. And so we want you to focus on the right information. Tip number two, all official practice problems that are either written for the official guide or written for past GMAT exams are still relevant. So any official practice problem from the past, let's call it 20 years, is still relevant to the new exam. So the instructional material you want to be skeptical of, the actual test material, the actual problems themselves, you don't have to be skeptical of that. So if you're working through current materials and you need more practice with things like data sufficiency or quant problems or reading comprehension, all the old versions of those problems from past GMATs and past versions of the official guide are still relevant to the new exam. The only types of problems that are no longer relevant are sentence correction, so anything to do with grammar or choosing the right way to construct a sentence. That's irrelevant. That's not on the test anymore. And heavy geometry material. There's a tiny bit of geometry on the new exam. The way you could think about that is there's only like one step related to geometry, and it's usually super basic on the new exam, such as needing to know how to calculate the area of a rectangle or the surface area of a cube. So you should know that basic geometry, but anything with more than like two steps involving geometry, like solving for angles and triangles, anything like that is gone. That's not really there anymore. And then some people argue that coordinate plane geometry is still relevant. I think that's partially true. It's basically just if you know how to read graphs like X and Y axes, then you'll basically be good with coordinate plane geometry. You will want to refresh on what slope-intercept form is, slope-intercept form of a line. If you have that, I really haven't seen much beyond that with geometry on the new exam. So if you're doing old practice problems and you see anything related to grammar, toss that out. If you're doing old practice problems and you see anything related to geometry that involves one more step, more than one step of geometry, you can throw that out. Every other old practice problem is still useful, and the way these questions are being asked hasn't changed very much at all in the last 20 years. So I think that's valuable information because that greatly increases the available source of practice problems for most of you, especially those of you who are studying only with free resources. And also simultaneously keeps you from engaging with outdated material that may hurt your progress. Tip number 3. Scores from the new exam end in a 5. So if you see a score like 595 or 645, that's a new GMAT exam score. Scores from the old exam end in a 0. So if you see a 680 or a 700, those are old, outdated scores. Why do you care about this? Well, business schools haven't collected enough data yet on students who've taken the new exam. And that means things like program averages and medians for incoming class test scores are usually based on the old version of the test. Now, that wouldn't be a problem if the score scales were the same, but the score scales changed a lot. The simplest way to think about that is new scores are 55 points lower than old scores. So if you wanted a 700 on the old exam, now you want a 645. A 645 is equivalent to a 700 on the old exam. New scores are 55 points lower than the old score. So a 55-point lower score on the new test is the same as a 55-point higher score on the old test. So if you wanted a 760 on the old exam, now you want a 705. If you wanted a 650 on the old exam, now you want a 595. This is really important because it'll help you set the right goal. Most people choose their score goal by looking at their desired program's website, looking at the average, and then setting their goal according to that, either on the average or slightly lower or slightly higher. As of now, you should decrease that by 55 points in general. The only exception to that is if the school's website specifically says this data is from the GMAT Focus Edition. Now, some schools might be publishing that data. I haven't personally seen any top programs publishing that data. I think those schools are still waiting to collect a larger data set. And part of this, not to get too in the weeds, is that exam scores from the previous version of the exam are still valid for the next 5 years. So even though the exam has been discontinued, if you took the old GMAT 3 years ago and now you apply to Harvard Business School, Harvard Business School is still going to accept that score. So part of this, like just helping you see it from the school's perspective, they're accepting incoming candidates, some of whom have the old score, some of whom have the new score. So it's not like they're trying to mess with you or something. It's just kind of a difficult transition that all of us are going through, and that's why we're making this content for you right now, to dispel the confusion and help you understand how to strategize. So those are the basics of revisions to the score scale and how that can affect how you want to set your goal. If you want a more detailed breakdown of all the differences between the new exam and the old exam, then check out our episode from early 2024 called The Definitive Guide to the GMAT Focus Edition, which we will link in the description below. So that's kind of like the high level punchline of new exam versus old exam. Now, later in the episode, I'm going to talk about policy changes, and those are going to be less about being able to tell whether you're engaging with content that's old versus new, and more just setting you up for success with the new test and the new policies, given that you might web search like exam fees or exam check-in process, and you might get some old content. Again, just cut out anything that's before 2024 unless you can validate it with a current respected expert. Now, part of this problem of confusion about old exam versus new exam and how it's differently named but now named the same again is the rise of generative AI. And currently, most frontier models are going to give you information about the old exam. For example, asking you to prepare for the analytical writing assessment, which is an essay section that's no longer on the new version of the GMAT. Now, this could change today. Like this could have already changed by the time this episode comes out with how fast that industry is moving. But as of now, I've tested every major frontier model. I don't know about some of the smaller niche ones. But I've tested every major frontier model by asking it to recommend material that's relevant only to the new version of the GMAT, and it can't always understand the difference. So when I talk about validating your content with an expert, unfortunately, as of today, you probably won't be able to do that with a generative AI tool. And some of you are using Gen AI, some of you are not. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong on that. We're not really here to discuss that specifically. I just want to help you with the GMAT today. But if you are going to use those Gen AI tools, which can be very useful for certain things, I want you to be able to use them in a way that's going to be productive for you. That's why I'm engaging with this particular part of the conversation right now. And I've seen it take some people off path a little bit, and I don't want that to happen to you. So, why do you personally care about this? Unfortunately, these AIs are not super great at study planning yet because they'll get some of those finer points incorrect. And like, you don't want your Gen AI plan to be telling you to work on sentence correction or geometry for a month. I've seen a couple errors that are that off base. As the models have improved over the past 6 months, that's gotten less frequent. But again, it's still just not there yet in my experience. So hopefully they'll improve this, and it seems likely like the growth rate and improvement rate is fast. But for now, I would just recommend avoiding using AI to help you study plan specifically. Instead, you can use it to help you understand specific questions. Like I mentioned, the questions from the exam haven't changed much over the past 20 years. And because most frontier generative AI models these days are trained on public internet data, most of their labeled data is relevant only to the old version of the GMAT. And huge apologies if I'm getting like too technically in the weeds with this. But I promise it'll be helpful. So it's okay to use these generative AI tools to help explain questions to you that you're confused about. But if you're looking for a study plan or like overall strategic guidance on your prep, I would seek out experts in the field to help you with that. So please just be careful with generative AI. It can definitely help you understand problems you're confused about, kind of like a 24/7 content only tutor. It's not perfect at understanding that you're studying for the GMAT if you just pop a problem in there, but it is at the point where it can be useful. And I'll tell you a couple things to include in your prompt here in a second that'll help you with that. So this is really important because if you ask a frontier generative AI chatbot for a GMAT study plan, it will generate one. It will definitely give you a plan, but it's less than 1% likely to be a good study plan, like fully optimized for your situation. In an environment as high stakes and competitive as this one, I think having the right plan is absolutely critical. So if you're already working with a reputable provider, please use their plan. Don't be trying to cross-reference their plan with a Gen AI tool as of today. If you don't have a provider, then we've got some free content for you that'll really help with this. So please listen to our episode titled How to Start Your GMAT Studies in 2024. That's from January of 2024 in the feed. We'll also link that in the description of this episode. And then if you want more help for structuring a free study plan and you're not going to invest in any paid providers, then listen to the episode right after that called How to Structure Your GMAT Study Time. And that should really set you up really well in terms of how to gauge your timeline, what kind of materials you want to be using depending on your budget, and just make sure that you're set up for success on the right path. Now, if you have questions about your specific situation and how to engage with that, feel free to touch base with us. We're at the GMAT Strategy on current social channels, and you can also email us at contact, CONTACT, at thegmatstrategy.com. If you listen to that and you're like, hey, I still don't know what to do, just reach out to us. We'll be happy to help. Just summing this up, Gen AI popularity is increasing. I think 2025, it's going to grow a lot. Like the market penetration, for lack of a better word, is probably going to increase significantly. I think a lot of these larger AI companies are focused on decreasing friction of user adoption because they've already, I think, appealed really well to the early adopters, and now I think they're going into the what's that called? Early Majority. Great book called Crossing the Chasm. If you want to learn about technology adoption cycles, really, really good book. Some of the examples are a little outdated, but the principles are really accurate in my experience. Just sorry, side note, I like that book. Um, so yeah, so I think these Gen AI companies are going to see, you'll probably start hearing about it more from people who are a little less educated than the like early adopter techie group on it. Um, and so I think it's important to understand how it can help you and how it can hurt you, since it's just not perfect. It's just not perfect yet. But it definitely could get really, really, really good this year. And we'll keep you updated on any significant updates that happen in that world and how it might affect your prep, tools you can use if you're on a tight budget, or even if you have a massive budget. Sometimes you just want to ask a question at 3 in the morning and your tutor isn't available for you, something to consider. But like many of the models will tell you, generative AI can make mistakes. It's not quite the same computing platform that we've been used to over the last, let's call it 50 years, which are what we're kind of used to computers giving us these like very logical, kind of like, I don't want to say irrefutable, but like very, very like trustworthy calculations. Like if I use the calculator on my computer, I'm not really checking it for errors in math. But if I put some math into a generative AI chatbot, it can totally get it wrong. So just look out for that. Um, Again, I expect that technology to improve significantly over the course of 2025. We'll keep you updated for as time goes on, but just for now and the purpose of this episode, please stick to the above recommendations. I wouldn't use it for high level planning, but you can use it for explaining specific questions and specific math concepts to you if your provider is not available at the moment. So if you have questions about AI, I guess reach out to us. But most of you just have questions about the GMAT, and most of you are plugged into AI like quite a bit based on my conversations with you this past year. So you probably could teach me a few things, and I'd appreciate that if you have some insights or you want to add to this. Just let us know, and we're very open to feedback. Okay, so those are the high level things that I think are the most important for folks in your situation, either starting to study or in the middle of your studies or trying to wrap up your studies and push them across the finish line. Those differences about instructional content versus problem specific content between the old and new exam, how to engage with those, and then how to engage with generative AI, which I think is just going to become really a lot more popular than it is already. What I want to do now is just run through some current basics that are really worth knowing and kind of a little hard to figure out based on old versus new GMAT web searches that I've done and that I've heard from people who are studying. So I'm just going to knock through these kind of quickly. These are more like specific policy related things that I think you'll be happy that I shared with you as time goes on. So number one is sending scores. The way it now works, once you already have an official GMAT score, is you'll see your score at the very end of the test on test day, and there's no more printout that they hand to you. They used to hand you a printout with that score after the test was over, but that doesn't happen anymore. You just see the scores on the screen. You'll see your total score on a scale to 205, from 205 to 805, and then you'll see your quant score, your verbal score, and your data insights score. Then within 1 to 20 days, usually 1 to 3 days, you'll get an email from GMAC, the people who run MBA.com and basically create the GMAT. And then you'll need to log into your MBA.com account where you registered to take the official test, and you'll be able to see your official score report at that point. From the moment you get that email, you'll have 48 hours to send those scores to up to 5 schools, and up to 5 school sends are included with your registration fee. If you want to spend more than 5, there's a small fee. The fees themselves can change frequently, so I'm not going to comment on that in this episode, just so it stays as relevant as possible for as long as possible. But I've also found that if you web search the fees, you can get pretty accurate information from MBA.com without much friction. So no big deal there. This score receiving and sending policy has changed a lot with the new exam. So it's been tough to find the stuff that I just walked you through accurately online. The fees are easy to find online, but now you know that's how score receiving and sending works. And if that changes at all, we'll update you in a future episode. So if you've listened to all episodes from now until the future, and we haven't changed our advice, then this is still the way it works. That brings us to an important part of score receiving and sending, which is score canceling. And you used to be able to cancel your score if you didn't like it. But now that's not necessary anymore at all, because now you're able to choose which scores that you send to schools and which scores you don't send. And that hasn't been possible before this new version of the exam. So this kind of comes back to where I led off the episode with, if it's like if you see some content about canceling scores and strategizing around that, don't worry about any advice about that because that doesn't exist anymore. It used to be the case that if you sent your scores, you would have to send every score you've ever taken, and you don't have to do that anymore. Let's say you took the GMAT 5 times and you only want to send one of those scores. You can do that now with the way MBA.com currently works. And so there's really no need to cancel a score. It's if you get the score, but you don't send it to any schools, they won't see it, and it's as if you never took it. So that's score sending, score receiving, and score canceling. Next point. You can only take the official GMAT 5 times in a 12-month period. This is super important because some people like to just go take the official exam to kind of see how it goes. Like, oh, I'll just acclimate myself to the testing environment. And I'd say that could be acceptable one time, but it's not recommended to do that more than once if you're concerned about the environment itself. Now, there might be some very specific cases where if you just have some specific anxiety that's attached to the testing room itself, I could see it being a good idea in certain narrow cases to take it maybe 2 times or something to just see how it goes and get acclimated to the testing center. But the 5 times in 12-month limit is hopefully not going to come into effect for very many of you. Hopefully you'll take the exam once, maybe twice and be done, but it's really common to have to retake the exam. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one is just natural variance in our ability to perform based on like sleep, diet, exercise, stress, just the day we're having kind of thing. But then there's also variance in the exam. I'll talk about the scoring algorithm a little bit later, but basically each question is chosen based on your performance on the previous question. And there's a little bit of randomness in that. For example, sometimes you might see 5 critical reasoning questions in a row at the beginning of a verbal section. And then other times you might see a reading comp right at the beginning of a verbal section and then 2 critical reasoning questions and then another reading comprehension. And that's probably not a major factor in your performance, but it can throw some people off. And sometimes the psychological weight of that of like, wait, what's going on? I feel a little uncomfortable here. Sometimes that could change your score a little bit. So that's why a lot of people end up having to retake the exam. And that's why I just want this to be on your radar. If you only have 5 chances to do something in a 12-month period, hopefully you're thinking you want to be careful about how you're utilizing those 5 opportunities. Next point related to that, there's no longer a lifetime limit. You used to only be able to take the GMAT 8 times total in your entire lifetime, but that doesn't exist anymore. So if you want to take the GMAT 5 times per year, every year for the rest of your life, that's currently an option. Perhaps, obviously, that is not recommended either. But I guess, whatever makes you happy. Um, I just don't want you to be confused or stressed if the process takes longer than expected. I have talked to people who have maxed out that 5 times in a 12-month period simply because they didn't know about it and they weren't even really thinking about it. And so I'll have a little bit more advice on that later in the episode. And I've also given a lot of advice on this in the past. So if you've been a regular listener for a while, you've probably heard me talk about not taking too many practice exams and making meaningful adjustments in your skill set in between practice exams. Same thing goes for official exams. If you haven't made a meaningful adjustment in your skill set, I'm sorry, it's probably just not a reasonable expectation that the score is going to be all that different. There has to be a meaningful change in the inputs to get a meaningful change in the outputs. Otherwise, I think you're probably just banking on luck, and luck does play a role, but I just haven't seen good results from people like playing the odds, so to speak, with the GMAT exam. So just my advice, use that as you will. Now, quick point that might be worth making here. Perhaps obviously practice exams can be taken at any point. So I'll talk a little bit about the MBA.com official practice exams in a moment. But if you need to measure your skills, then probably should use a practice exam, not an official attempt. If your skills are validated and you're like, I'm ready for this thing, that would be the time to take an official attempt. So that's the lifetime limit and the limit within a 12-month period. Next point. You should start your extended time accommodation application as soon as possible if you have a history of learning differences. I know I'm kind of bouncing around here a little bit, but I just want to run through all these policies so that you're aware of them. The most common question I get asked about people with learning differences and getting accommodations for that is, will schools see that I had accommodations? And the answer is no. Okay. If you have learning differences and get accommodations on the exam, the only people who are going to know that are you and the people at GMAC who administer the GMAT. Like they have to know that you have accommodations to give you the accommodations, but that information does not get shared. And so schools won't know. They also don't care if you had accommodations, even if they did know, but they don't. And if you think about it, like if your score showed that you had accommodations, that would like totally defeat the purpose of trying to level the playing field with that for people who just physiologically work differently. Basically, schools just want to know that you can score high enough on the test to handle the coursework at their program. So that's all you need to think about there. Don't worry about schools knowing if you had accommodations. No one's allowed to ask you that in an interview or anything like that. So if you're in that situation, like you can proceed hopefully comfortably and anonymously with that process. Now, the reason I bring this up is it can take some time to get approved after submitting your application. And I do talk to a decent number of people every year who have a clearly documented history of learning differences and have not applied for accommodations. And I personally think that's a mistake. Now, it is a personal choice. It is totally up to you. And I respect your opinion on this. It is ultimately your choice, but I'm just here to give you my advice as a seasoned professional and someone who's had a lot of success with a lot of people in this process. I highly recommend just starting that application early, get it in right away if you've been putting it off, and early if you're just starting on this path, because you'll want to know the available time that you have near the start of your prep. So if you get 50% extended time or 100% extended time, you'll want to know that so that you can set your metrics in your practice questions and on your practice test the right way. Because that's really going to affect your baseline practice test. Like when you're taking a practice test to start this process and measure your baseline skills, or you're rebaselining after studying for a while, if you're using 50% less time than you would have on the exam, that's going to totally mess up your data set, and it's going to be super hard to make good inferences about how you should proceed with your plan. So if you have a history of learning differences or you've been diagnosed recently, please get the application submitted early. It's not that complicated to do it. You just have to go to MBA.com and you should be able to figure all that out. But again, if you get stuck or have questions, let us know. The process itself is relatively easy to discover online. You can web search that and find it with relative ease. That part's not that different from previous exam to new exam. Next thing to discuss is online exam versus in-person exam. The online exam and in-person exams now essentially have the same policies. There was a time during COVID where the policies were a little bit different. There was kind of this like weird arbitrage of timing and things like that that some people were talking about, and you might see some content about that online. After 2024, the only thing I would ignore is people who are asking about it. um, but basically, just to set the record straight here, there's a 16-day mandatory waiting period between all attempts on the official GMAT. So if I take it online, I can't take the in-person exam the next day. There needs to be 16 full days. So you start counting those 16 days from the day after you took the test. All right. So don't count the day you took the test specifically. So if I take the exam on the first, I start counting 16 days on the second. And then starting with the second being day one, 16 days later, I can take the exam. Okay. So you can't take the official GMAT 2 days in a row. That's important to know. Practice exams can be taken at any point. So if you need to measure your skills, again, use a practice exam, not an official attempt. If you need to take practice exams 2 days apart or 10 days apart, that's totally fine. There's no rule around that. But again, I guess if we're going to make a rule between you and me, and just me having your best interest at heart and me having struggled with this a ton back when I was in your position studying for this test, taking practice tests doesn't really increase your skills. As appealing as that idea might seem, as logical as that idea might seem, it is generally not true of the GMAT, even though like there are a lot of arenas where that mindset does work. Like if I write a lot of computer code, I'll probably get better at coding. If I do a lot of managing of people within a large organization, I'm probably going to get better at managing people in a large organization. Like that's true of a lot of scenarios, and it seems like it should be true of this test. but I just haven't seen the 7 tests in 7 days thing work on a percentage basis very well at all. Are there 0.01% of humans in the population who can do that? Just take 7 GMATs in 7 days and get a great score? Yeah, those people definitely exist. But usually they like started at a 98th percentile score and then they took 7 exams and got a 99th percentile score. Like it was like mostly natural ability, not to take anything away from those people's work ethics or ability to learn really fast. Like I think that's amazing and like totally awesome, great gift. But for the vast, vast, vast majority of people in the test taking population, just make sure you have a meaningful change in your skill set before remeasuring your skills. Promise you'll thank me later if you take that advice. So, practice exams can be taken at any point. Official GMATs have to have a 16-day waiting period between tests. Now, the other main thing to know about online versus in person is that there's a much greater likelihood of having a tech issue that will negatively affect your score on the online GMAT. So it is a bit riskier if you're on a tight timeline. If you're not up against a deadline, then the online exam could be more convenient for you personally. And in that case, I think it's a totally acceptable move to make. But if you're really up against a critical deadline, I would strongly recommend taking the exam in person unless there are other things that make the online exam like a better fit for you personally, such as you've taken the exam in person 2 or 3 times and like had really bad anxiety and you want to try out just taking it in the comfort of your home. That could be a reasonable reason to take the online exam, even if you're up against a deadline. But with a lot of this advice, I'm not necessarily telling you what to do. I just want you to be informed so that you can make good decisions for yourself, if that makes sense. So I would estimate a 0.01% chance of a tech issue with the in-person GMAT. Like you'd have to take the exam like 1,000 times to see a reasonable tech issue. But online, I think it's about a 30% chance. So that's a major difference. This is simply because of all the technology between you and the exam when you're taking it online. You've got your operating system, you've got your internet connection, you've got all of the infrastructure of the internet. You've got the operating system of the proctor, and then there's the human element in that as well. And that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff, and there's just much less stuff in between you and the exam when you're taking it at an in-person center. So it's not like the fault of the people who make the online exam or anything like that. It's just kind of is what it is. So um, yeah, these rumors that can surface out there sometime that I've seen of like one exam is easier than the other. That's not true. The online exam and in-person exam are the same algorithm, same questions. It's just much more likely to have a tech issue. So if you're up against a deadline, I think take it in person. A couple more points on this. It's usually a little tougher to schedule an in-person test due to availability. So I would highly recommend scheduling at least 3 weeks in advance, ideally more, if you want a good selection of in-person exam dates. If you're in a tough situation, though, which a lot of people are at this time of year with round two deadlines coming up, having to get like a quick retake in, you can check the in-person availability every day for like a week or two. And sometimes you'll see new spots come up because people frequently cancel or reschedule their exams. So you may see some additional availability open up if you have checked that and you're struggling with that. And yeah, that's an option that I do find helpful for a lot of people in these kind of tight spots, which you might be in right now, just at this time of year. One last thing to consider with online versus in person is that the room requirements and whiteboard requirements are very different for each. So please look these up as they can change over time. I've got an episode from 2024 called Test Day Experience if you want more current details in audio format, and we'll link that in the description of this content as well. Just a quick rundown of that. You'll want to buy your own whiteboard for the online exam, and that has specific requirements that you'll should be easily able to web search and find on MBA.com. But in person, they give you the whiteboard. Okay, and it's a little bit different. At home, you'll have like a straight up regular whiteboard, like how you would normally think of a whiteboard, I presume. And you'll need to buy your own marker and your own eraser, and you have to have all three. With in person, the whiteboard situation is laminated paper that's spiral bound, front and back 10 sheets. So you do less erasing. In fact, you're not even supposed to erase anything technically with the in person whiteboard. And they'll provide you that, and they'll provide you the pen. So you don't need to buy any whiteboard materials for the in person exam. You will need to buy your own whiteboard for the online exam. Online exam, you basically don't want to have anything on your desk that's not an approved comfort item. Generally can't have external monitors. Generally can't have multiple monitors. This is stuff that I've just seen kind of surprise people on the day of the exam and they have to move it around right before the test starts. It's just a little annoying and inconvenient. And you'll want to check out the prohibited items list and non-prohibited items list on MBA.com, which is updated regularly. Again, quick web search, prohibited items on online GMAT. It's a good search for that if you're not sure how to search it. And you can have water with the at-home GMAT, but technically you're not supposed to have water unless you have like a note from a doctor with the in-person exam. So those are just a couple things to consider if you're like on the fence about in-person versus online. And then also if you're going to do in-person, slightly more prepared now. If you're going to do online, for sure, slightly more prepared now, hopefully. And again, reach out to us if you have any questions about this. I know I'm rattling off a lot of details. I'm just trying to include the things that I think are going to be helpful and leave out the things that you can web search on your own relatively easily. Last thing with the online exam, can't have anything covering your ears, no earplugs, no over-the-ear headphones. But with the in-person exam, you can have earplugs, and many test centers have over-the-ear headphones that you can also use. And just call the test center that you're scheduled at in advance to see if that stuff is going to be available for you on test day. Okay, so that's the rundown of online in-person. A couple more line items to help you out here. There are 6 official practice exams you can get from MBA.com. There's 2 for free, and there's 4 you can buy. You'll want to use these sparingly because 6 is not a ton of practice exams. Having said that, you can take each exam twice with a very low chance of seeing repeat questions. Most of the time, you'll see 0 repeats the second time you take a test, but I have seen a couple repeats come up, and that could inflate your score and make it harder to make inferences about your study plan. So it kind of makes it like there's 12 official practice exams available, but I would try your best to get away with 6 and then only use the repeats if you absolutely have to, if that makes sense. I really want to thank everyone at GMAC, just in case they listen to this on the off chance you're listening to this and you work at GMAC, who made this possible with the repeat exam taking without repeating questions, because it is a massive help to students everywhere. So great job on that. Thank you so much. I don't know if that was a big challenge for you or if you even did it on purpose, but it really helped everybody. So thank you for the people who were involved in that. With all that being said, I already kind of touched on this, but I just want to reiterate it because it's so important. Many students take too many practice exams and they run out before their prep is finished. So please don't do that. Only take an official MBA.com exam when you've meaningfully increased your skills. If you haven't meaningfully increased your skills between the previous exam and the new one you're taking, then you're kind of just relying on hope. And hope is really powerful and definitely recommended in a lot of situations, but it is not a good strategy in my experience. So please use hope responsibly. Rounding out the need to knows here. The scoring algorithm is essentially the same between old GMAT and new GMAT. There have been some small adjustments. You're going to hear people speculate online a lot about how the scoring algorithm works because it just really slaps people around and people just expect the GMAT to be based on accuracy because they've never even considered taking a test that's not strictly based on accuracy in their entire lives. And all of a sudden they're like, wait, I got 2 questions right here. I got 2 questions wrong here, and it's the same score as the last test where I got 5 questions wrong. How's that even possible? What the heck? So just expect a little bit of noise around that as people online and who post on forums kind of like confront that reality. But the algorithm itself hasn't really changed very much, and certainly not enough to change your approach. So the scoring is different, like I said, 55 points lower on the new test, but the algorithm itself and how it adapts is only slightly modified and basically responds to all the strategies it ever has. And just to drive this point home, it's not based entirely on accuracy, which is a little bit of a mind blow for a lot of people. So if you want to understand better how it works, please just head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, and register for the webinar that's titled How to Reach Your Dream GMAT Score in Half the Normal Time. I'll talk you through the basics that you need to know about the algorithm. Talking about the algorithm in audio format usually just doesn't land super well, so hence having that visual aid for you. The video is free, by the way. Last thing, fees. The fees change regularly, but are also pretty easy to find online. I think I mentioned this already, so please just search current registration or rescheduling or canceling or score sending fees and use the info from MBA.com. You should be good there. Those are all the basics that should set you up for success during this current era of GMAT and MBA admissions, which is I've just found to be really confusing for a lot of people with the old exam, new exam, old exam scores being reported on MBA program websites, whereas new versions of the scores being 55 points lower. Like it's just like, wait, what? What's happening here? So if you have questions about any of this, just reach out anytime. We're at the GMAT strategy on current social channels, and we are emailable at contact@thegmatstrategy.com. And again, we'll keep you updated if any of this changes and when it changes. Now, if you're struggling in your prep or you're just not seeing the results that you want to see fast enough, I just want you to know that you're welcome to book a call with us and speak live. We'll help you figure out what's been going wrong with your prep. We'll help you figure out what you can do to improve it, and we will help you out with a study plan. If that sounds good, just head to our website and register for the video that I just mentioned, and just take a look at that to make sure our approach resonates with you, and you're not like, man, I really hate the way Isaac talks about this. Definitely don't want to book a call with these guys. And then we'll ask you to tell us a little bit about your situation via a super simple intake form, and then we'll follow up with you with next steps to book the call. There's no charge for the call. This is a service we're really, really excited to offer the GMAT community, and yeah, hope to talk to you soon. If that doesn't sound appealing for any reason, there's no worries at all with that. By the way, just full transparency, we may tell you about some of our paid products on that call, but we don't always offer our paid products to everybody, and we certainly never try to like convince you that our program is like good for you or anything like that. It'll be presented as a series of options. We always give you other options that are outside our program as well if you want to invest. But if you don't want to invest and you just want free help, we will do that as well. So I don't want you to have any surprises on the call and be like, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought I was signing up for. Okay. But it's not a sales call. Okay. It's straight up helping you out. And then if you ask us specifically about paid steps, then we will tell you about that. Okay. So again, if that doesn't sound appealing for any reason, no worries. Totally fine. As always, my greatest hope is that this material will make your studies as easy and as painless as they can possibly be. If you want more tips and strategies for optimizing your performance on the GMAT, again, please just head to our website, thegmatstrategy.com, which is linked in the description of this content. In the meantime, this is a regular show, so please subscribe and please stay positive and stay consistent with your studies. Talk to you all soon.